All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the California Heat Assessment Training Workshop. We are going to be providing a interactive session today. So there's going to be a little bit of open discussion. There's going to be some work on some laptops we've provided here, or some that you might have on hand. And then we're going to open up for Q&A after a short demo. So I'd like just to first introduce my co-presenters here. We have Jason Bargos from CDPH.
Hi, my name is Jason Bargo. I'm with the Climate Change and Health Equity Program at CDPH, and I direct the research on climate change and health. We participated in the 4th assessment for California on climate science, and this project was part of that. So we are here in part sort of promoting the best science that we have in terms of the relationship between changing temperature regimes in the state and health outcomes for your jurisdictions. And we hope that you come here today to learn about how you can use some of that science, and also give us your suggestions about what is missing or what might be most useful for this tool in the future. So anyway, feel free to find me during or after the session if you want to talk about more of this or any of the other climate change and health related work that CDPH is doing. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Natalie Ambrosio. I work with Nick at 427. I manage our communications and thought leadership efforts.
And I'm Nick Steinberg. I'm the Director of Research at 427. We're a small climate risk analytics firm based in the Bay Area. And we contracted through the California Natural Resources Agency a couple of years ago as part of a climate change assessment, the 4th climate change assessment, with the intent of building out a tool that could be used by practitioners, both local, regional, and state level, to inform long-term planning in regards to extreme heat preparedness and long-term resilience planning. So I'm going to go through the tool today, describe a little bit about the methodology, how to use it, and really I just want to emphasize that this is an opportunity for you all to get acclimated with the tool, ask any questions that you might have, and then of course let us know, are there things that might be missing from it, or things that we can improve upon based on the type of decisions you make within your agency or within your jurisdiction. I think the first item on the list here when we're talking about extreme heat in the context of public health, and that's that it's pretty subjective how heat affects individuals and also areas. I know in our quick breakout session we were talking about the different temperatures that affect different areas. In the Bay Area, we were hit with 100 degrees early in June. That's an early season heat wave and something that people are not very used to, but it's also particularly severe for the folks that don't have AC, which tends to occur quite a bit on the coastal area. I know that's the same for the foothills and some of the Sierras. So this is becoming an increasingly urgent issue. And what we're hoping to demonstrate today is that you can really prioritize areas that are particularly susceptible to extreme heat based on the combination of climatic factors, so the things that are changing heat waves, and then also the local vulnerability. And there are a number of vulnerability indicators we'll present here that have really strong associations to extreme heat. And so I'm going to go through some of these data layers, just show you how to navigate the tool a little bit, and then we'll be on our way to doing a quick case study where you'll actually investigate with a small group how to answer a question yourself. And so I like to start these sessions off by asking a really quick question, and it's a fairly simple one, and that's really about how we define heat. And I sort of gave away the answer here, but I'd like someone maybe to raise their hand and tell me what they think a heat wave is or what it constitutes. And there's no right answer, it's pretty subjective, but just like to get a feel for the differing views. Anyone have a guess? Go ahead.
I would say you're talking definition for extreme heat, or
for an extreme heat, something that might constitute danger.
I would say that a temperature that would compromise the health and safety of a certain population.
Perfect. That's as general as it should be, right? Oftentimes you'll be alerted from the National Weather Service, another entity, that there's a heat wave because some statistical threshold has been surpassed, or some absolute temperature has been surpassed for a daily and a minimum nighttime temperature. The issue there is that might not be specific to the local population. And so one of the dimensions of our research was including health conditions of that local population and getting a better understanding of the trigger points. So the point at which that local population responds negatively to heat conditions. And as we just discussed, there's places like San Francisco, Marin County, Santa Cruz, down through San Diego, where a heat wave can be in the 80s. And you can have very high negative health impacts. Whereas here in Sacramento, parts of the Central Valley, it's in the hundreds. And that varies by season and also varies by population type. So I'll be presenting here a few heat wave definitions that vary by season and also vary by population type. But first, let's go ahead and look at the tool itself and go to the main interface here, which is a map where you can see sort of the spatial patterning of a series of climatic indicators. And these are things that help characterize what a heat wave is. So a heat wave is really defined by its severity, by its timing, by its duration, and also how frequently it occurs in a given summer. So users are presented with these indicators over here on the right. There's this accordion. You can turn any of these on or off. So here we're looking at the frequency of annual number of events. And this, again, is generated by climate change models that are building off of some of these heat wave definitions. So if you're not familiar with climate change models, what they essentially do is try to simulate extremes based on known or at least well understood concentrations of greenhouse gases and how that's actually going to change extreme heat conditions for a local area. And these are fairly high resolution. So we've been able to map all of this to about the census level. We've also been able to derive a lot of health information at the census level. So we have a fairly good understanding of what the sensitivity is at a very local level and what climatic factors are expected to occur. So this time bar at the bottom starts here at 2020 and actually goes out to the end of the century. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn this out to 2040. And one thing to note, give it a second or two. This is about 300 gigabytes of data processing, so it takes a minute. Sure, go ahead.
What is a health event?
A health event is any event that constitutes a public health impact. So it's not a specific universal definition for the entire state. Every single one of these census tracts has a different definition. And I'll actually show these definitions for each area. It's a little bit of a deeper dive than what I'm showing right now, but just to get you familiar with the navigation. So you can go ahead and turn these climatic factors on or off. You can explore by decade. So here we're looking at the changes in extreme frequency, frequency of extreme events. And there's an actual drop-down, which basically allows you to look at the raw number of events, or you can look at the changes over time. And it's always wise to give it a second to load, because it is a lot of data. So these areas outmarked in red here, these are relatively high for the state. So you're seeing areas, Sacramento region, sort of the I-80 corridor, some areas of the Central Valley, where we're seeing a relatively high addition number of events. And this can be a risk factor because people are generally less prepared for a high relative increase in the number of events based on their historical experience. All these climatic factors can be combined with vulnerability indicators. So what we've combined here are demographic indicators, health-related indicators, and environment-related indicators. So I'll just go through those quickly. Some really strong determinations of health sensitivity in the local area really have to do with education levels, outdoor workers, poverty levels, vehicle access, isolation that can be linguistic or just based on the number of people in a household. And then a lot of the health-related indicators really have to do with, these are things that are both predictors but also outcomes, asthma prevalence, percent low birth weight, and cardiovascular disease prevalence. In the environment, we look at both air quality conditions, but also the prevalence of impervious surface, tree canopy, urban heat island, and then also some land use changes that have been projected for mid-century. And anytime that these are turned on, you're presented on the map with these bold outlines. And the idea here is that these bold outlines are showing you priority areas for a given county. So let's go ahead and go in here to Sacramento. You can go ahead and navigate through a simple zoom like you would on Google Maps, or you can go ahead and type in a city name and it'll bring you directly to the site. And let's get a little wider perspective here.
Can I go back to the question from the audience for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Health event. So just a background on how this was created. 427, and you'll probably be able to fill in some gaps in my knowledge of it, but 427 had access to emergency department visits from across the state, as well as temperature information on a daily basis. And so as part of the fourth assessment work, what they did was they looked at these multiple different definitions of heat wave. Maybe it's 3 days over 90 degrees. Maybe it considers humidity. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's nighttime temperature. Maybe it's maximum temperature. They looked at all these different definitions for different locations, and they looked at which definition of a heat wave produced the biggest association or biggest response in those emergency department records that they were seeing. Is that accurate? Or?
Yeah, and for the epidemiologists in the room, this is a common approach to really understanding effect sizes for different environmental conditions. So we use it's referred to as a distributed lag nonlinear model, and it tests the latency of morbidity. So we went ahead and looked at ER counts everywhere between the same day of an event all the way out to 4 to 5 days after an event to get a strong association of what type of heat wave spurred the highest number of ED visits. And with 30 years of data, we have a fairly good understanding of what type of heat waves are generating, what types of impacts. So to your question, there are heat wave definitions at every single census tract. There was about 63 that we tested for every single census tract. And those permutations were then selected based on emergency department visit counts. So every census tract has its own specific definition for season, and then some of them also have definitions for a vulnerable group, which I'll describe a little bit later.
So a heat health event is, if you looked at a census tract like where we're sitting right now, maybe it's humidity indexed, a temperature that considers humidity in 2 days over a certain value, and anytime that value is exceeded, that's a heat health event.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and there can be hundreds of heat health events that are then tested. Go
I
ahead.
don't know. So you used certain specific ICD-10 codes, 9 and 10 codes. Were they all heat-related ED visits, or did you use asthma ED visits, or what?
This is a really big data project because we had 30 years of data on a daily interval. We actually used all-cause morbidity.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So in your
Interesting.
yeah, so
So
not all of
they're
them
specific.
might be heat specific, right? But all of them are associated with days that are exceedingly hot. So there's a strong probability that they're there for heat-related reasons. Yes. So back to the main interface here that you're looking at the changes in frequency of a heat event over the Sacramento area. Those areas in bold here are what we call high priority areas. These are relatively higher in the distribution than other census tracts within that county. Specifically, they're 2 standard deviations away from the county average. So for low education here we're looking at, or if you want to turn on some of the other indicators, they'll give you an indication of what areas are really standing out from the rest. But of course, you can go get the data just by scrolling over the census tract. And because this is so much data and you don't want to scroll your cursor around everywhere on the map, you can also download all this data. We just created a download feature, which I'm very excited about, where you can specify a county or you can specify a city, and you can go ahead and get all the data in a CSV format. And it has FIPS, and it has any other spatial referencing. So if you have someone in your office that's pretty fluent in GIS, they can really easily throw this into a map and you can do your own analysis if you'd like. And we also have all the climate data broken up, the historical heat health event information, all the vulnerability indicators, and then also all the metadata, because this requires a little bit of explanation.
Does that data include the definition of a heat event for a locality?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you go ahead and download a county and you go ahead and specify a census tract, it'll have the specific definition of a heat health event by season and also by group.
So looking at, but is it being looking at the county, can I get a definition for a county or a larger area than a census tract?
There's so many textures of demographics and climates within counties in California because they're so large that they have very different definitions. So you can have areas of the county that respond to a heat wave that's in the 90s and another part of the county that responds in the 80s. And that could be due to differences of population or due to differences of orography and climate. So these are fairly specific definitions. For some counties, they tend to be pretty close together just based on the size. Sure, go ahead.
What about air conditioning? Do you have data that looks at which homes have air conditioning?
I wish. No. Air conditioning data is hard to come by, especially statewide and at this resolution.
They had some in the census, right?
I believe that if you wanted to get an idea of air conditioning saturation, you could do it for a few cities, and it's not always recent data, and yeah, there's some issues with how it's surveyed as well, so we did not include it. Go ahead.
So I just want to confirm something that I heard earlier. The data, the subset of data that you use for the emergency room visits, that wasn't the factors that you took into your data collection were just raw data of emergency room visits on days that exceeded the heat index.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so you did you do any balancing off of normal days, or is it just all? Is it saying that, okay, well, everybody who came into the emergency room on this day, we're going to say that they were there because of the heat?
No, we made no association to heat. What we did is we did a case control. So we quantified the average ED visit rate for days that are between the 25th and 75th percentile for max and min temperature, sort of get a normal baseline.
Yeah.
And then we evaluated those that qualified as an extreme heat day based on 63 definitions. And then we actually compared those and found the days that had the highest relative difference between a normal and extreme heat. Yeah. And this is actually building off a methodology that was designed by CDC a couple of years ago. This is actually the second application of it. There's a couple applications done in Florida that are a little smaller scale. This is the first one done statewide. So this is really, I think, the core of the tool is exploring sort of the differences in current temperatures and future temperatures across all these dimensions of the heat wave, and then layering in some of the vulnerability indicators. If you want to dive a little deeper, which a lot of folks do, if you're trying to get some understanding about the specific climate projections, you go ahead and click on a census tract, and you're provided with this analytical pop-up here. And it is broken up into two tabs, historical heat health events. So these are the specific thresholds that have constituted a negative public health impact in that area. These are the conditions. So temperature on top, humidity on bottom, and you're going to see min and max broken up here in the vertical columns. And then we also have these references, these vertical lines. If anyone remembers the 2006 heat wave, it was fairly oppressive. So want to include that as a sort of reference. And then vulnerable groups, so these are groups that demographically or by racial identification have been historically known to be more sensitive to heat. So we grouped individuals under the age of 5 and over the age of 65 and all minority groups and looked at their ED visits during those days. And there's actually quite a bit of difference in the thresholds. Where we have data, you can see differences up to 6 to 8 degrees. These groups are responding negatively as compared to a general population.
I ask a question when you say where you have data. I notice a lot of the Sierra Nevada counties on there don't have anything. Do you have data, or they just didn't have any events?
We didn't have enough to confidently say that we could establish a threshold, and that's due to just low population over a very large area. Yeah. So you'll notice these differences predominantly for areas where you have a lot of demographic heterogeneity. A fairly diverse community is probably going to respond to lower temps as opposed to general population. And then all this is broken out by season. So you'll see the differences here. Midsummer, folks tend to be more acclimated to extreme heat and might respond at a slightly higher temperature than they would early in the season or late in the season. Now the projections are looking at a few dimensions. They're looking at the frequency, so the increase in the number of actual events over time, and we do this by decade, and then also duration. So the number of days that may constitute an event, and events start at about 2 days, and we can see here by looking just at the actual, these 2-day events are going up to 3.5 days, up to 5 days, and up to a week long by mid-century. And just some results from our analysis, we actually found that duration was one of the prominent changes or the highest signals in a lot of our research. Central Valley and Sierras areas, they're going to experience up to 2 weeks of extreme heat, whereas historically it's been 2 to 3 days. Some coastal areas, this is true. Early season heat waves, late season heat waves are also on the rise. So definitely some prominent climatic effects happening here. Now in this interface, you have several options. You can change population type to see the projections by different thresholds. You can look at the occurrence of the 2006 heat wave and the probabilistic projections of its occurrence. So it looks like it was a very rare event here in 2020 for Yolo County and happening once every couple of years by mid-century, depending on the RCP scenario that you select. You can also select all of this by time of year. So we're in the June, July, August phase right now. So you can go ahead and explore what the projections look like for this time of the year out across the end of the century. And then these percentiles. This is just to give you the ability to look at best case scenarios and worst case scenarios. So we did a model rank given the variability that's inherent to climate models and provided those projections from a 5th percentile all the way up to 95th. So I generally like to start with a medium and then explore from there. And then again, you can explore all of this by the actual number of events or the differences from historical period through this option here. So I'm actually running a little short on time on the demo here. So I'm going to hop back to the main interface here and talk you through a quick case study. And this is sort of prep work for the breakout session where you'll actually be joining a small group and going over a question and trying to find the right kind of data to answer that question. So this tool is really helpful, I like to say, just for prioritizing areas that could use further attention for either interventions in the short and long term for messaging. So areas where we have some frontline populations that could be particularly susceptible to heat. It's also very useful for understanding where to make some built environment interventions. So where do I have low tree canopy where I also have high urban heat island effect, or I also have high projections in extreme heat. And then again, it's very useful for understanding the combination of the two and trying to get a really good understanding of if you have a particular type of population like outdoor workers working in an agricultural community, and then I'm also seeing increases in the duration of heat events or early season heat waves. That's a pretty important issue to pay attention to. So let's actually take that one. Let's go ahead and check out one of the big agricultural areas of the state. If I can spell it right. And let's just zoom out a bit. So I have a fairly good understanding coming into the tool, let's say, of what my sensitive subgroup is for this sort of I-99 corridor, Fresno area. It's probably outdoor workers. This is the group that typically spends the most time outside, may not be generally acclimated to very extreme heat in the early season. So let's go ahead and throw the outdoor workers layer on. And then for climatic factors, I'm interested probably in early season heat waves and then also duration because the amount of time under stress is fairly high. These workers spend 12 hours outside at a higher respiratory rate than most. So let's look at duration and where those changes are most prominent. And again, this is a planning tool. We're looking out 2020 and beyond. So these aren't necessarily actual conditions in 2020, but they're an estimate of the directional change. And here we're looking at areas where folks probably live. They may work there, they may work nearby. So not a direct indication of where outdoor workers are in the area. But I'm seeing some indications that we have 40-50% of the population working outdoors, just west of 99, west of Fresno. And then I'm also seeing fairly high changes in duration, anywhere between 9 and 10 days in an average heat wave. That's 2 weeks, that's a week of work, essentially. So I would probably identify these areas as priority areas where I'd want to look at farms, I'd want to look at households that might be spending a lot of time outdoors in the fields, and just kind of have a better understanding of what sort of stresses that they encounter. So I am going to stop there. I'm going to hand this over to my colleague Natalie, who's going to go through a couple of the case studies. All of these are pretty flexible. You can go ahead and pick the area of your choosing. And then we'll break up into small groups, and we actually have extra laptops if people didn't bring any. And we'll work through the case study and report back. Thanks.
The first case study is to identify frontline populations based on both climatic changes and existing vulnerabilities in a rural agricultural county, and then also looking at a coastal urban city. So to explore both the climate changes and the vulnerability indicators in those two very different types of jurisdictions. The second case study is to explore the local threshold, seasonality, and severity of heat waves for an area of your choosing, and then to draft tailored outreach messaging based on these different types of climatic changes and also based on the type of populations you see in that area. And the third is to explore the climatic changes alongside the vulnerability indicators in a city of your choosing, and to come up with 1 or 2 potential adaptation strategies based on those changes and the population's needs in those areas.
So if you don't have results, that's fine. Just go ahead and step up to the mic here. But we'd like to learn about your process, any kind of challenges you encountered, and take it easy on that one. And then also anything that was missing that you could use more information on. And then also, one more, how you can use this.
I'm not going to go in your order, I'll go in my order. So.
All right.
So as far as identifying frontline populations, we're from the Central Valley. It's pretty obvious that outdoor workers is important for us. So with your tool, we were able to see that in some areas, 56% of our population works outdoors. So that's alarming. We integrated some layers with asthma, vulnerability, and also low income, and those things were also concerning. We even went to San Mateo County because we had some folks in San Mateo County. It was nice to see that it doesn't matter what county you're in, it's a useful tool. So we were encouraged by that. We were concerned with our homeless population, but we figured since your info is down, we can download it. We have, in our county, we have some data with homeless populations, and then we also have that Empower tool. Mm-hmm. So we thought if we layer that with your stuff, we'd be rocking it. So that's all we have. Any questions?
That's great. That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to tail off that, there's going to be data that you have in your jurisdiction or your agency that is going to be more specific, maybe more up to date. So the ability to go ahead and download this data, merge it with your own data. You can actually use the map interface for some of this. You can go ahead and use your own GIS. It's really just meant to be a resource in a lot of different ways. So thanks. Group 2.
That's us.
Okay.
So I just talk from here. So we looked at Sacramento County. We looked at a couple different census tracts, and there's some variability. So we're supposed to explore the local threshold, seasonality, and severity. So the seasonality, of course, the thresholds were higher in the summertime. People can tolerate higher heats in the summertime than they can in the fall and the spring. That was consistent throughout. However, there were some parts of the county where the summer thresholds were in the hundreds. And then there were other parts of the county that were a little bit more vulnerable, where there were thresholds even for the summer were in the low 90s. And I think one thing we're surprised about was that the nighttime temperatures of like the high 60s was still a risky threshold for even areas where it was in the hundreds for the daytime. So I thought that would have been higher. And then for messaging.
So we had a discussion about how to structure the messaging and who to target. So one of the recommendations to do it community-wide, and another focused on those who are most vulnerable, like the elderly, and those are with chronic illnesses. So the messaging would include things like if you have neighbors who are elderly or who are ill, check up on them to make sure they're well. For those who are working outdoors and can't stop working, make sure that they are reminded to take frequent breaks, to stay hydrated, to go to shaded areas if they don't feel well. So I think, again, some of these messages are already happening in many of our counties, but to really focus it on those who are the most vulnerable and can't stop their activities.
Yeah.
One other, since there was like geography related, we had some comments about putting the messaging in specific languages that are common in those areas. So for Sacramento, Spanish, maybe Hmong and Russian languages.
That's great. So very targeted bilingual messaging, and also maybe even possibility of coordinating with something like Meals on Wheels or another agency that interacts a lot with the elderly population. That's great. Thank you. And again, I'm running out of time here, so let me close with this. This isn't going to be a tool for everything, but we hope it's a resource for some of your, maybe not just daily work, but some of your long-term planning, strategic work at a seasonal or annual level. And you can contact any of us anytime if you have a question or you're downloading the data and working through it. We're always available, and just want to say quickly on a personal level, I'm very excited to meet the practitioners of this data. We've built this over the course of 3 years and been doing these trainings now, and really happy to see people engaging with the tool and finding ways that they can use it. So thank you again for engaging.